Welcome everyone to this special interview edition of Monday Match Analysis, and we welcome back a friend of the program, one of our favorite guests, one of our only guests really, Steve Flink, author of the book The Greatest Tennis Matches of All Time, a tennis Hall-of-Famer. Steve, how are you?
Good, Gill. It's great to be back with you again. Always enjoy talking tennis with you.
Yeah, have we done this before, this year in review? I don't think we did this last year.
No. I mean, obviously we've done a lot after majors and after Wimbledon's, but I don't think we've had a chance to recap the year, so this one should be a nice new adventure for us.
Yeah, it should. It's always fun to look back and try to come to terms with everything and reconcile basically the last 11 months. It is a long season. A lot happens. What kind of sticks out to me here is you had this year almost in three chunks. You come out, Federer wins the Australian Open, and it almost feels like things have picked up where they left off from 2017. But then slowly, then Nadal has a really strong clay court season, and then the second half of the season, the latter half, Djokovic takes over. It's almost like all three of the big three come into this offseason and are kind of happy with their years.
I agree, but I feel, Gil, a little more so that way especially toward Novak, to some degree toward Rafa. I think Roger has indicated that. He's expressed what you're saying, in that he looks back on the year, and anytime you win a major, you're happy you've achieved that, and he certainly can look back and be proud of that. And he finishes the year at 3 in the world. It's certainly impressive. But I do think he's not terribly happy. In his case, it was sort of a gradual decline after Australia, and then getting to number one, and with Rotterdam and getting the finals of India as well. As he sort of deteriorated the rest of the way. Had the disappointing loss at Wimbledon to Anderson from 2-11, and then match point in the third, and lost 13-11 in the fifth. Had that loss to Millman at the Open, and didn't finish the year quite the way he would have wanted. But Novak has got to be delighted, and Rafa knows it was really just the injury that took him out of the year following the Open. But he can look back on the quality of his play in the 9 tournaments that he played and be pretty proud that with playing only 9 tournaments, he finishes the year at number 2.
Right. Well, whenever Rafa wasn't withdrawing, he was pretty much winning. For
yeah,
Roger,
absolutely. I mean, it started late. He had to really kind of started in with the clay, but he had his usual dominance on clay, just one loss to team, and wins his 11th French. And then he was so close at Wimbledon, losing 10-8 in the fifth in the semis to Novak, and had a very good Open before the injury kind of ruined his chances against Del Potro, also in the semifinals. And in between, he won in Canada in the Masters 1000 event. So his standard was really quite high, and I think actually he played as well as he did the year before. In some ways, you could argue he was even better, but it just, unfortunately for him, he couldn't play after the Open, and that destroyed whatever chance he would have had to be number one, because Djokovic was so spectacular in the second half. It might have been impossible anyway.
It's amazing how important that Wimbledon semifinal match was when we look back on the year, and this was almost Novak salvaged this year. This was all of a sudden the year of Novak. But if that match went the other way, and it almost did, then you could make a strong case that Rafa Nadal really won 2018.
It would have almost certainly been that way, because he would have beaten Anderson in the final just like Djokovic did. I have no doubt about that, especially Anderson having played the marathon with Isner. So I think that, yes, Rafa would have had the French and Wimbledon, and regardless of what happened after that, he would have been really, really delighted with that season. But that, as you know, Gil, that's the nature of tennis. These excruciatingly close 5-set matches can turn seasons around. It was just the moment and that Djokovic needed to recapture his best form. And he knew it could have gone either way, but he pulled off the triumph. And then from there, I mean, it was magnificent. I have to say, I don't think he would have lost those 2 finals at the end, by the way, in Paris and London, if it wasn't for the fact that he was battling some kind of a virus there. And physically, he was not quite up to par in those last 2 tournaments, even though he played some great matches in both. Or else I think he would have closed the season in even more dominant form. But nevertheless, he was a runaway number one, and he won the 2 biggest tournaments in the sport. And yes, you're absolutely right. The Rafa match was the turning point of the year. but look what he made of it. Look at what he did after that.
Yeah, I want to actually get back into the last 3 weeks with those Novak finals in a little bit, but I also want to draw back to Federer real quick. In terms of the deterioration and the steady decline, I think we all saw that, but for me, it's almost expected at this point. I almost feel like this happens every year with Roger, and I think just like players have a certain level of endurance over the course of a match, I think players have there's a level of endurance that comes with this long season. And Federer, over really a long period of time now, I've never felt like he's really brought his tennis to New York, and I've attributed that to his age, and that's the one area where I feel like you see his age kind of come out and his body break down, and he can't play his best tennis late in the season.
Yeah, those are all very valid points, but you have to add to that the deep disappointment he had at Wimbledon, which he minimized in terms of any public comments, but it was the second time that had happened to him at Wimbledon, in his prime years, where 2011 he was up 2-0 against Tsonga and lost the match in 5, and here he is 2 sets up on Anderson, also match point, misses a backhand pass to win in straight and ends up losing 13-11 the fifth. So that, I think, was pretty jarring. He also complained, Gill, in a couple of interviews he made reference to his hand, an issue with his hand that was affecting his forehand. And he mentioned it, I know before Paris he mentioned, and he said it was okay from Laver Cup. He started to feel better at Laver Cup, but it bothered him from the grass court season on. But then he also mentioned after London this week, he made another reference to it and said it had still been hindering him somewhat in London. So I don't know how serious that was, and frankly, I wish he hadn't even brought it up at all. But the bottom line is, age is catching up to him in some ways, and the difference this year obviously was the Wimbledon disappointment, because yes, you're right, he's had a lot of tough luck at the Open since he last won there, and way back when in 2008 against Andy Murray in the finals. But you don't expect that to happen at Wimbledon.
I'm kind of glad you talked about you mentioned the virus with Djokovic. I caught a little bit of flack for suggesting that he might have been sick against Zverev, but I was watching these long rallies, and there was such a large gap between the endurance between Zverev and Djokovic, where Sasha just was in way better shape to play the grueling rallies, and I thought, that can't be right. Djokovic, there must be something going on. With Paris, it was well documented.
You sized it up. You were absolutely correct in your perception, and he did talk a little bit about it after the match. He tries not to do that. In this case, he said for 3 or 4 weeks he's been battling something. And I think that the proof, by the way, and that your observation was spot on, is that he complained after he beat Zverev in the round robin portion, that they asked him about blowing his nose and pulling the handkerchief out of his pocket and what was wrong. And he said, yeah, unfortunately, I've got something going. That's not very good. He was vague about it. I don't think he wanted to talk about the specifics, but he was not making excuses there. He had just won a 4-1 match. But I think it caught up to him in the final, and I think the reason it did was the scheduling in London. He always had days off until the weekend. You know how they do it, one group on Sunday, the other on Monday, right through the week. Well, finally, he ends up playing Friday against Cilic, Saturday against Anderson, and Sunday against Zverev. And I think the third day in a row was, even though the matches were not long, was really, really kind of exposed his unusual physical frailty in this case. Because you saw there was no spark. In addition to not hanging in the long rallies, he wasn't patient. He wasn't defending anything like he normally does. He'd normally be very happy in those long rallies with Zverev, and eventually his defense would win out. But it wasn't winning out that day because he didn't have the belief in his physicality, and he wasn't able to hit shots on the stretch anything like he normally does. And so from 4-all in the first set, as he said, he kind of fell apart. You don't break this guy 4 times in one day when he hasn't lost his serve the entire week. And the reason for that was not really so much the serve itself as the first or second shot following the serve. He just was not as sharp as normal. And to Zverev's credit, he took a full measure of it and played beautifully himself.
Right, and down a break in the second set there, the fight left him way quicker than we're used to seeing. So just to be clear.
Oh, no, absolutely. He was very disappointed in the game that he played at 4-all in the first set. It was 30-all, 4-all. Djokovic's serve pretty routine up until then. 2 bad forehand errors in a row cost him the break, and then he lost some heart after that. That's not like him, and I definitely attribute it not to the fact that he didn't want the title badly, but to the fact that physically he was just not up to par. And he did a good job in the press conference of trying not to harp on that. But you could see from his comments that he was frustrated and disappointed that he wasn't able to produce his best. And then we can go back to Paris. Look what happened there. Now there, again, scheduling played a role. He played 3 tough sets with Cilic in the quarters, played that incredible match against Federer on the Saturday that was 3 hours long and tiebreaker in the third, and then had to play Khachanov on Sunday. That's a lot of tennis in 3 days when you're not feeling your absolute best. And again, you saw him, as he did against Zverev on Sunday, you saw him start to lose patience and rush in the rallies in the second set against Khachanov and try to serve and volley unexpectedly. And it was all kind of born of the fact that he didn't think he could stay in the longer points, that he didn't have his usual stamina. And obviously, that's such a big part of who Djokovic is the ability to, to wear you down and to run everything down and to use his defense to turn to offense. He was not able to do that in either of those finals.
I agree. So just to be clear, the last 3 weeks doesn't have much bearing on your outlook for Djokovic next season, in the sense that, because he didn't run away with these titles, it wasn't as strong an end of the year as it could have been. So some people are kind of thinking, oh, well, maybe Djokovic isn't as invincible as we thought he was, but it sounds like we're kind of just writing it off to, mostly the illness.
I think so. I really do, because, if you look at his level, what it was day in and day out. Also, you have to look at the fact, Gill, that, starting with Queen's Club, a final, he wins Wimbledon. He loses in the round of 16 to Cespedes in Canada, but then wins Cincinnati, wins the Open, wins Shanghai, and then final of his last 2. So in those last 7, 8 events, he missed 1 final. So I think he's going to be happy about that. You're right. He would have looked absolutely invincible if he'd won Paris and London and closed the year out like that. On the other hand, it keeps him hungry, and I don't think that he's terribly worried. He has great respect for Khachanov and how much he's improved, just missed making the top 10 in the world, 11 in the world now. And then he has great respect for Sascha Zverev as well, who consolidated his place, barely missed out on number 3 in the world, just 35 points behind Roger now. And Novak definitely respects him, but he'd beaten him in Shanghai. He'd beaten him in the round robin in London. So I don't really believe he's fearful of those younger players, including Cespedes. So, but I believe that what you were getting at earlier was a big factor, and that Djokovic was diminished by the fact that he was feeling physically frail.
One thing that does stick out, though, is the performances on the other end of the court against Djokovic. Sascha Zverev came out there and showed us a serve that he had never shown us before. Khachanov the second half of the year.
He did. In fairness, I think he served great in the first set of the round robin against Djokovic, and served very well against Federer too. Only broken once. He served really well against Roger, and throughout that first set of the Djokovic round robin match, he was serving brilliantly. And then suddenly, though, after having a couple of break points on Djokovic's serve at 4-all, at 4-5, Sasha felt the pressure of serving to stay in the set and cracked a little bit. And then, he just wasn't there mentally in the second set. But yeah, his serve was very impressive to me all week in London, up in the 140s and finding the corners. And he's a little bit of an enigma to me, Gill, in the sense where he showed us what he could do. We saw all sides of him in London, kind of quitting a bit in the round robin against Novak, squeaking out a match with Cilic, but then peaking at the end, played nicely against Isner to clinch his place, and then beats Roger and beats Novak. The question now with him is, are we going to finally see something in the majors? You're 21 years old, approaching 22, and hasn't been out of the quarters of a major yet, and you'd think that best of 5 would be no issue for him. But he lost 2 matches this year at the majors, 6-love in the 5th. Explain that, to Chung in Australia and to Gulbis at Wimbledon, 6-love in the 5th. That tells me that mentally there's sometimes, in some of those matches he caved a bit, and I hope he'll overcome that with Lendl's help, because he, to me, he's a very likely guy to go on and win multiple majors. And this coming year is an important time for him to step up. And I think he's got a serious chance at winning one major, at least getting on the board in 2019. But Australia will be important to sort of set the stage for that, and to at least finally get, say, to the semifinals, at least make a semifinal and start building towards something better.
That's a fun debate. I've seen a lot of people have that debate after Sascha won the tour finals. Will he win a major in 2019? I'm leaning towards no, but I do want to ask you, of all the young guys, 21 and under, or you can go up to 22. I believe Borna Coric is 22, for example. What do you make of this crop? Who do you think will really reign supreme among these guys?
Well, that's hard to gauge. I mean, Tsitsipas, it strikes me, he's the real deal, and that was a nice win he had over Novak in Canada.
Yep.
And he's a great player. There's no doubt in my mind about that. And he has the mentality. It's a little tough to tell with some of the others, but I do believe, to get back to your point on Sasha, that yeah, you may be right. Maybe he's not quite ready next year, but I think he may well be, and I don't think it'll happen in Australia or Paris. I don't think he will be quite ready for that. I'm thinking Wimbledon or the Open. By then, he's really put himself in a position where he really believes he can do it, and he has the goods to back it up. So that's where I'm looking for him to get on the board, one of those two.
7 out of the top 10 players to end the year are 30 and above. I mean, that can't be sustainable, right?
You wouldn't think so, Gill. I don't think so. I think that trend's going to start changing, and that a bunch of guys in the low to mid-20s are going to start taking over those spots. And obviously, we're not going to see Roger's going to turn 38 next year, and you got Rafa, who's going to be 33, and Novak and Andy Murray 32. They can't go on forever, right? I do believe Djokovic has got 3 or 4 really great years left, though, frankly, with his physical frame, and I feel he's going to have that long-range durability that close to what we've seen from Roger. Rafa's going to go for another year or two, but yes, you're right. The trend's going to go back into the mid-20s, I believe, and maybe we won't see too many more years like this one. And also, it's going to be hard for guys like, the Cilics to sustain it. I mean, they're going to have no easy time fending off the younger generation. Kevin Anderson as well, as great as he was this year, it won't be that easy for him to protect all those points next year and to automatically get to another major final, which he's done the last couple of years with the U.S. Open and Wimbledon.
Right. Outside the big three, you have Del Potro, Anderson, Cilic, and John Isner at number 10. All those guys are 30 or above. Who do you think?
Yep, exactly. And again, with all due respect, I don't see John Isner staying in the top 10 next year. Top 20, absolutely. Top 10, I really doubt it.
This is something I have no empirical evidence to back this up, but I think a lot of the times these guys hit 30. I think of David Ferrer, and I believe he was the age of 32 when he had the best year of his career. It almost seems like they can take a year and they sort of peak and they maximize their hard work, and then often after that, for these late bloomers, it's kind of a 1-year deal. I know for Ferrer, the year I believe he made the French Open final, 2013, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. He said, I worked so hard that year, and I knew I could never work that hard again.
Yeah.
So you wonder about a guy like this.
Obviously, in fairness to contrast what Ferrer said, you would never hear that from Rafa Nadal.
Right.
So part of it is your mentality, but yeah, he finally hit a wall these last couple of years, and so that's the danger is there for the likes of Kevin Anderson, however, and Isner. But I think that in Kevin's case, I think he can still hang around the top 10 next year. It won't be as even without achieving quite the results he did this year. But there's no doubt with all those guys, they're living on somewhat borrowed time, and they can't count on their bodies year to year, and there can be quite a sharp decline from one year to the next at that age.
And then it's very interesting, just looking at the rankings right now, if you look outside the top 10, 11 through 16, besides Fabio Fognini, you have a 22-year-old Khachanov, 22 Borna Coric, 23-year-old Kyle Edmund, 20-year-old Tsitsipas, 22-year-old Daniil Medvedev. So you have these young guys just knocking on the door right outside the top 10, and a lot of these older guys trying to hold the fort down. It's very interesting.
Yeah, no, Medvedev has got enormous potential. Borna Coric, I'm really impressed with him. He's so studious and professional. And driven.
Yep.
And sometimes can get in his own way through a bit of nerves, and his forehand can go off, but I really like the progress he made this year. I like the fact that every time he gets on the court with Roger, he seems to think he can beat him, or he's right in there. He lost in 3 sets at Indian Wells, then beat him on the grass and beat him late in the year again. So he had two out of 3 against Roger, and I sense that those guys are can make some significant advances in 2019. Cespedes and Coric particularly, but I think Khachanov showed us some great stuff at the end of the year. Yeah, he's terrific.
Coric, great mental, great physical. The ball striking might lag a little bit behind. That's how I see him. But all these guys.
Well, it's really
the forehand,
the
right?
Forehand.
Right. The backhand's great.
Yeah, backhand is a great stroke, and the forehand has improved. And sometimes he gets a little too self-conscious off the forehand. He's aware that he's missing. He actually seems to slow his swing down. He gets too careful. But I'm not that worried about it. And I think he's got a very underrated serve, very good placement on his serve. And then in Khachanov's case, he's just a physical. He's kind of he's very gifted physically, and he moves extraordinarily well for his size. And he really destroyed Zverev before he beat Djokovic in Paris as well. That people forget about that match. He just destroyed him. So there's some very good signs with him. I clearly see him in the top 10 next year.
I agree.
The way he wrapped up this one, and I see Cespedes definitely in the top 10 next year.
I'm with you on both those guys. Who outside the big three, I should say, do you think is most likely to win a major in 2019? My pick is Juan Martin Del Potro.
I don't try. No, I think it's Zverev. It gets back to Zverev. I mean, obviously at 4. I think Juan Martin. I would love to see it happen. I just think that these gaps, these absences of these injuries that keep recurring, that it's very hard. I don't see him sort of leaping right out and winning the Australian. He may be fresh enough to do it, but I don't see it. I think he's going to threaten. I think he's going to be in some, maybe he's back in a semi or another final, but I don't trust it with the number of times. His schedule is too disrupted. And would I love to be wrong. I would much rather you call that one right. But I see Zverev as really the far and away the most likely. On the other hand, he's got to reverse this trend of where he's just not done himself justice at all in the majors, and he can't justify losing 6-love in the 5th twice and looking as if he's sort of totally lost. And then on top of that, a very disappointing match, as you probably saw, against Kohlschreiber at the U.S. Open. So I think that he and Lendl will be discussing this, and Ivan will give him plenty of good advice on how to cope with these majors and the pressures and best of 5 and all of that. And there's no reason at his age. And you pointed out, I mean, you watch him in a match against Novak when Novak was not up to par physically in London, and you feel like this guy could play 6 or 7 sets. It doesn't make sense to me that he has yet to negotiate best of 5 with any success.
It's certainly strange, and he hasn't really been close yet. That's my problem. Is I almost feel like he needs to ease himself into having major success. Which
he does.
Mostly
he does, and that's why I said that I think that it's important that he does well in Australia and hopefully in Paris too. And if he's that quarter, say it's a semi and a quarter or 2 semis, or where he's at least finally gotten himself into the final stages and penultimate round or what. Then I think he sets the stage for something big at Wimbledon or the Open, or maybe do very well in both. But I think listen, it was one step this year. He worked so hard, won that string of 5-setters to get to the quarters of the French. That was pretty good. Not good enough, but it was a step. Now he has to really be pushing hard for at least a semi in Australia. And I think if he gets that, let's say he lost in the semis to Novak, or had a good showing at the tournament, that would, I think, propel him.
Yeah, he needs to first make a semifinal and start to feel like, okay, I can do this, before he's going to go 3 rounds further. I think we both agree, all of a sudden go 3 rounds further than he's ever been before.
Well, yeah, it's true. It's possible. That's just doing it the hard way.
Yeah.
And I think that he feels like Roland Garros was good, but then, of course, he didn't follow up well at Wimbledon or the Open. Now he has to there's no reason he shouldn't do very well in Australia, coming off this end of the year. And I don't really think he thought he was going to win London going in. He certainly wouldn't have thought he was going to win the tournament after he lost it to Djokovic in the round robin. So he's coming off a real high, and now he's got to really, back that up in Melbourne. And there's no reason that he shouldn't. His game matches up pretty well against all the top players. He almost beat Rafa on clay this year. He does beat Djokovic finally at the end of the year. He beats Roger at the end of the year. So he's shown what he can do against all the top players.
In a moment, I want to go through with you the Monday Match Analysis Awards, which I did on Monday, where I gave out certain awards for the year. But first, I feel like there's been a lot of chatter this year, maybe more than in past years, or maybe it's just recency bias on my part. A lot of rule change chatter, more chatter about best of 3 versus best of 5. You had the ball person incident with Verdasco, where people were saying ball people shouldn't handle towels. And then, of course, every year with the next gen finals, you have no lines judges and all of that, and people start to discuss that. If you were in charge of tennis, are there any rule changes you'd make right now?
Well, of the many rules that they experimented with in the last couple of years in the next gen, the one that I think makes far and away the most sense for the regular tour of the ATP World Tour is no let. I think it's almost a no-brainer, because if you look at most lets, what percentage of lets have you seen where the server will look up at the umpire as if to say, "Are you serious? That was a let?" Where neither player would have even known it. So the fact that once in a while you might get a bizarre type of let where the ball hangs up and gives the returner a big advantage, so what? It's so rare. I would like to see that's the one I would like to see tested at the top level, that I believe would get great support among all the top players, because they get exasperated with the what they call phantom lets.
Yeah,
so
that's true.
Guess that's the first move I would make.
I don't mind that one. I don't mind no ad either, though.
Well, no ad there you're talking about, and that's been used in college tennis, and I like it for excitement. I think it brings a little bit too much, a bit of too large an element of luck. I mean, there's certain things I do like about it, because it moves matches along, and I can see why you're attracted to it, because if you take away these 6, 7, 10 deuce games, you're going to reduce the time of matches significantly. From that standpoint, I like it. I don't think the players would be terribly happy about the top players. That's just my view. But the fans would love it. The fans would love it. I could see testing that out in some 250s. Some ATP 250s, to see how it seems to go over, maybe even some 500s, and see how, what kind of reception you get from the players who haven't been through it before, and then maybe think about introducing it at higher levels.
I don't even like it as a player, and I want to see it. I don't like it as a player because it's incredibly nerve-wracking to have to face these deciding points, and nobody likes nerves. But I do think it's almost worth it.
Point. I understand your point, and listen, it is also true that the players were not fully prepared for tiebreaks when they were introduced in 1970. Now they had to deal initially with a 9-point tiebreak, which meant that you could actually have simultaneous set point and simultaneous match point. And it once happened with a big match between two Americans, Cliff Ritchie and Stan Smith, at the end of the 1970 season in California. It came down to literally 1 point to decide the number 1 U.S. ranking for the year. And Ritchie won it with a diving volley. Now, they had to go from that original 9-point tiebreak. They quickly switched to the 12, to what we know now. And it is true, Gill, that the players initially were not enamored of the tiebreak, but they did adjust. And it could be that they could make a similar adjustment with no ad. I know that Isner wouldn't mind it, because he remembers it from college tennis days.
So there wasn't win by 2? Is that what I'm hearing in the tiebreak?
The original tiebreak was not win by 2. No, it was the first to 5. You won 5 points, but you could win it 5 points to 4. So the serves went 2-2, 2 and 3. So if somebody could be serving, say an Arthur Ashe playing Stan Smith as an example, at you put them up against each other at the U.S. Open in 72, and again Ashe could be serving at 2-4, and he'd get to serve the last 3 points with Smith having the choice of which side he wanted to receive from at 4 points all. But yes, you could win it by 1 point. Now they didn't like that. That was the original sudden death tiebreak, and it quickly went over to what we now know is the standard first to 7 points winning by 2. And it's fairer because it goes with tradition of the sport, needing to win by 2 points. And that's what makes the no-ad a little controversial, is that, again, that gets away from winning by 2 points in an individual game. It's sudden death every game at deuce. That's tough. But I do agree with you in the sense that the fans would love that, because it'd be added game by game, there'd be added tension. It also might force some players, Gill, if you did do it, to bear down extra hard on serve to avoid being put in the position of a sudden death point at 3 points all or deuce, or whatever you want to call it. It would make them concentrate even harder. So to take that tension away, make sure to hold at love or at 15 and not be put in any kind of a dicey, tension-packed moment.
Well, that was a great history lesson. I did not know that. That's why the people get their money's worth here.
Well, it was fascinating that and they put up that Jimmy Van Allen, who was the inventor of the tiebreak. He used to hold up a red flag, waving it for sudden death at that first when they first used it at the U.S. Open in 1970. I'll give you another interesting tidbit. The next year, Gill, at Wimbledon, as you know, Wimbledon has now decided they're going to finally, because of what happened with Isner and Anderson, they're going to finally go to a tiebreak in the fifth set, but at 12 games all, as I'm sure you know. Now, originally what Wimbledon did after the U.S. Open had become the first major to use the tiebreak at 6 games all, just as it is now, is they originally played the tiebreak at 8 games all. They waited till 8 all. And that quickly disappeared. But I think they're kind of stubborn that way. They sometimes feel like they've got to preserve tradition a little bit more than they need to. I thought that was unnecessary, and eventually they thought it was unnecessary. And I think the 12-all, I feel the same way. I feel like, why are you changing? It's much better than not having a tiebreak at all. But just play it at 6-all the way you do in every other set, because what you're basically saying is you're still going to make those guys play an extra set. So they're still playing, in essence, a 6-set match instead of a 5-setter.
Yeah, that was the most logical reaction to the rule, in my opinion, was exactly that. Is, okay, well, that's not going to do very much. That's not going to affect us very often. So
yeah, it's not, but also it prevents 26-24 in the fifth. I get it.
Yep.
It prevents 70-68 in the fifth with Isner and Mahut, but it's still longer than it needs to be, and it's still changing the rule for the final set. And I just feel like just stick with it. It's the same. It should be the same rules for every set. I've always felt that, and I felt that the U.S. Open is the one to get it right. But I am also hoping, Gill, that the French and Australian will now follow. There's more pressure on them to stop playing out the final set. Now that Wimbledon has done it, I hope that they will think seriously about changing their rules as soon as possible.
I agree. Let's get into this now. The Monday Match Analysis Awards. Okay, I'm gonna read you off the winners, and we're gonna see if we find agreement or if you feel like some guys got snubbed. So Player of the Year, I think we'll agree on this one. Novak Djokovic.
Oh, of course. Of course.
Comeback Player of the Year, Juan Martin Del Potro. Because I couldn't give it to by the way, just to be clear, no repeat winners. Technically, it would be Djokovic as well.
Yeah, exactly. Because you can make the case, obviously, that Djokovic, because of where he was and 22 in the world in the spring and everything that happened to him in the second half of 17. But I agree. I think for Del Potro to get himself back, getting in the top 5, like they're getting back to the finals of the U.S. Open, the semis of the French, the quarters of Wimbledon, he had a terrific year. And
Indian Wells as well.
I'm with you on what's that?
And winning Indian Wells.
Yeah, and winning Indian Wells and saving match points against Federer. It was a magnificent campaign for him, and unfortunately, at the end, injured. But he's a good choice. And
breakout player Karen Khachanov. I almost called him Haran.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that was a big rise to number 11, and he just looked so much more confident at the end and so much more stable. Almost took Nadal into a fifth set at the Open. That was one of the best matches at the majors of all year long. Then has the win over Djokovic in Paris, and whether Djokovic being a little physically depleted, it still was a great effort. So I think yes, I'm with you on that too.
Matches. Oh, first, my bad. Best comeback: Kevin Anderson, Roger Federer at Wimbledon.
Yeah, it's hard to deny it. I mean, you're two sets to love down, match point down, defending champion. You know, one of the great grass court players, if not the greatest. I'd put Sampras above him, but still, it was a phenomenal comeback for Kevin, and I don't think you could top that.
Okay, now we have a top 3 matches of the year. Number 3 is Nadal over Thiem at the U.S. Open. I'll read them all, and we'll see if one of them got snubbed. Number 2 is Nadal over Del Potro in the Wimbledon quarterfinal. And then number 1, once again involves Rafa Nadal, once again at Wimbledon, just goes to show you how strong that tournament was, is Djokovic over Nadal in the Wimbledon semifinal.
Yeah, so you're going with Djokovic and Nadal 1, you're going to the Del Potro and Nadal 2?
Yes.
And then Nadal and Team 3. Yeah, I certainly think it's a clear-cut choice for 1. There's no way I might have put the Nadal team, but no, I think considering the standard that I saw from Del Potro in pushing Rafa to his limits, I would go along with that. I would go along with that. I'm not. We're not having much conflict here. I'm with you
okay.
on all 3.
All right, good. Best performance goes to Rafa Nadal against Dominic Thiem at the French Open, straight sets victory. So that's like most dominant.
Yeah. Does it have to be a final?
No, not necessarily.
I'm inclined to agree. I mean, he played you probably remember Ken Rosewall saying he wished it could have gone longer, and but Rafa, considering that he had lost a team the previous time out, he did this 2 years in a row now at the French, where he loses to him prior to Paris and then avenges it in Roland Garros. And as great as Thiem is on clay, I thought that was pretty majestic stuff. And off the top of my head, I'm not coming up with a better match, with a better performance.
Now, I have a pick for best shot. I think it would be pretty wild if I asked you, what do you think the best shot of the year is, and we both came up with the same thing. So is there one shot this season that you remember as being possibly the best shot? I know this is kind of tough to think about on the spot, because I know I had to think about this one for a second, but let's see if we land on the same shot, if anything sticks out.
Well, that's a tough one.
It is, right?
Because nothing's jumping right out at me.
Yeah. I'll give you the tournament. The shot is...
give me the tournament.
Yeah, the shot's it's the U.S. Open.
It's the U.S. Open.
Yep.
And is it in the Nadal team match? No,
it's Roger Federer.
Oh, you're talking. Oh, yeah. I mean, against Nick Kyrgios.
That's right. That's it.
Yeah, around the net post. That was pretty spectacular. That was pretty spectacular, and I think what's interesting about that is that he would look like he was coming into great form in that match against Kyrgios. He really destroyed Nick, and then, of course, ended up losing to Millman just a few days later, which was such a shocker. One of the most shocking defeats he's ever had at a major. But that way, as an isolated moment, and the speed, the alacrity with which he moved on, to cover that shot wide to his forehand and get to the drop shot and manage to slide it past Nick. Yeah, I would say that was a pretty magical moment in the men's game. Considering how spectacular it was.
And what a segue you just made for me, because this is the last award. It's best upset, and I gave it to John Millman.
Yeah, it has to be. It has to be because I think the odds were
It was stunning.
so remote.
Yep.
And also remember, it was another one of those Federer matches that got away from him because not only did he win the first set, but he's serving for the second, and he's up 40-15 double set point, 2 sets to love up, and loses his serve and loses it again, and the next thing you know, he's lost it in 4 sets. Yeah, I don't think that you would have found many people wanting to take odds on that match. I mean, that was not an upset that anybody was calling. And it's at the U.S. Open, and Millman was seen as something of a journeyman, a very likable fellow. And as you saw, he played really well against Djokovic, lost in straight, but made Novak work really hard, rally in, rally out. 20, 30-stroke rallies were routine. And, I think that was quite a come-from-behind effort from Millman, and it took a lot of temerity, too, because, he knew who he was playing, and he knew how much the crowd wanted Roger to win, and he just put all that out of his mind and played the match of his career.
Yeah, no one saw it coming except for one person in my Twitter mentions, apparently. That's why Twitter's an amazing place. Whenever you say there's no one...
What did the person tweet?
Basically, I sent out this tweet that this is pretty funny. I said, this is one of the craziest things I've ever seen. How is Millman able to do this much running in this kind of humidity? And this guy replies saying, of course he can. It's obvious. He grew up in, so where it's a very humid place in Australia. Brisbane?
Right.
Anyway, he's saying, you should have known. I go, oh, I guess I should have known.
You mean he's saying because it was so humid, that was,
he was trying to say that I shouldn't be surprised that Millman was winning. I mean, it was crazy.
Well, that doesn't make sense.
I know. Well, it's Twitter. It's Twitter,
we all
Steve.
know the different levels of the game, and and especially being down a set. And as you know, these top guys, even in best of 5, their success rate from a set up. I mean, Djokovic is about 96%, and there's a whole slew of guys, including Roger, who were in the lower 90s. It's rare, even from a setup in a major, that they lose. And he was twice a point away from being 2 sets up. So I don't think anybody could have logically called that.
Right, which is, you can find many, any opinion in the world. It exists somewhere on that website, Steve.
Oh, I believe it. I'm sure.
It's
that's
amazing. It's something else.
The nature of it, but that's interesting. Now, I'm not going along with that, but it's interesting that you found somebody that believed it.
Yep. So I found it to be a really enjoyable year, a very memorable year. Any parting words that you think would go along with this 2018 season of tennis?
No, I just think it's back to what you were saying at the beginning. It was nice to have the big 3 back. I mean, what happened in 2017 is we had Roger and Rafa divide the 4 majors. And this time we had them divide the first 2, and then Djokovic took the last 2. So it was really like old times. I mean, because Djokovic is climbing that ladder of history once more. And now he's tied Pete Sampras at 14, and he's inevitably going to win a bunch more. The question is he going to win enough to pass Rafa and start closing in on Roger? And the 2019 campaign will be crucial for him because I think, as he's approaching 32, I think that Novak needs 2 majors out of this coming year. He really needs more than 1. He needs 2 to really start thinking about catching Roger. And also, obviously, making sure he passes Rafa. And that's not going to be as easy as we might think because Rafa maybe wins the French again. But I have to tell you, if I was going to predict right now, and Djokovic met Nadal in the French Open final, all things being equal, I think I would probably take Djokovic.
That's quite the way. That's quite the way to go out. I would pick Nadal, given how he was playing when healthy this year. But
see, and the reason I say that is no disrespect to Rafa. We all know he's the greatest clay court of all time. But I'm thinking back, they had a couple of really good finals and 4-setters, and then they had that epic 5-setter in 2013 when when you mentioned David Ferrer, and Rafa ended up beating Ferrer in the finals, but Novak was up 4-3 in the fifth and touched the net when he could have. It was a deuce trying to get to 5-3 in the fifth. He was so close before losing at 9-7 in the fifth. And I feel like he's had a lot of clay court wins over Rafa in his career, and I don't think he'd fade physically. And listen, it could be a blockbuster, and I hope if we do get that match, I sure hope it's a final. I mean, at this stage, obviously they would be 1-2. I hope they stay 1-2 so that if the meeting happens, that it would have to be a final. But I would pick him right now. So you and I have finally found a conflict.
There we go. It took 45 minutes. There are so many exciting things right now. I mean, you just mentioned this race to I guess, end with the most major titles. Roger Federer with 20 right now. He's in the lead, but Nadal and Djokovic, that number is within reach for both of them. I mean, this is only going to get more and more exciting. And next time we'll talk, it will be either before or after the Australian Open. But I know it's going to be a long off season. But people will be clamoring for it, I think.
And we still have that Davis Cup final coming up, so there's one last
that's true.
duel to celebrate this year, and we'll see how Cilic performs there. But it's not going to seem like too long an off season, Gill, for these top players after the grind of the first 11 months. But they deserve it, and they have it, and they'll all be fresh and eager and ready to go in Australia. And I can't wait to see that major.
Yeah, they do deserve it. But you work very hard too. How are you celebrating the off season?
Oh, well, I'm in the process of working on a book on Pete Sampras right now, so I'm going to be spending quite a bit of time during this off season writing the book. But,
oh, wow.
It's sort of looking back mainly on his 14 majors, but looking back on the heart of his career, and I'm enjoying that and looking forward to spending a lot of the next few months doing that, and then I'll still be writing my weekly columns for tennis.com. So I'll have enough to keep me busy, but it's a nice time to sort of pause, reflect, like we just did on the year gone by, and to look forward to what could be a really remarkable 2019 season.
Yes. Is that exclusive? Have you told anyone that yet? The Pete Sampras book?
Have I told anyone?
About the book?
Oh, I've meant, some people know. I've told some people, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. I just need to make sure, if we're breaking news here or not.
Well, I mean, to some people it would be a news breaking.
Yes,
I mean, there's
that's
some
for
people
sure.
in my industry that know about it, but not everybody.
Right. Okay.
So, but you asked me what I'm doing, and that's what I'm doing.
I appreciate that. All right. I've kept you too long. This has been a lot of fun as always. Steve Flink. Find his work on tennis.com. Get his book, Greatest Tennis Matches of All Time. Steve, thanks for coming on again.
Gil, thank you. I always enjoy it.
Awesome. All right.
All right.
That has been... Whoops. It always sounds terrible when I turn it off. All right. So that was Steve Flink. Went over the season. A lot of exciting things. We'll be talking to Chris Lewitt. That will drop late Saturday night. He was my former coach. He now coaches in Vermont. He has his academy, the Chris Lewitt Tennis Academy. He's the author of 2 books, The Secrets of Spanish Tennis, and I believe it's called The Tennis Technical Bible, or something along those lines. So I think you guys will enjoy that conversation. Until then, don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.